A big part of the Ulupono Initiative's mission is to try to help Hawaii be more self-sufficient in local food production. We're actually quite blessed to have a very broad tool set that we're allowed to work with. So we're able to make grants to nonprofits, for-profit investments. We're very active, as the legislators know, at the state legislature and at county council. We're also able to fund research and pilot projects. We have a lot of degrees of freedom to work with. And across all the different tool sets, since our founding in 2009, we've deployed about $43 million to the local food sector. But probably a few examples really quickly, hopefully would be helpful. So one of my favorites in terms of efficiency is the grant loan writer program that we fund. We fund 3 grant loan writers, one at Kahala Center, one at Hawaii Farm Bureau, and one at OACA. And it just is it has a lot of leverage built into it. So you fund one of these grant loan writers, and they tend to, pre-pandemic, bring in 6 to 15 times as much money as you fund them in terms of government money, so USDA and federal funding. So pre-pandemic, 6 to 15 times. From 2020 to 2021, because of the pandemic and all the relief funding, it was 47 times leverage. So these 3 people brought in $18 million to ag in Hawaii. Very proud of that program. Another one that many of you probably know of is the SNAP Double Up Food Bucks program, where it doubles the purchasing power of SNAP recipients so long as they spend it on local produce and sometimes local proteins. That also, just by happenstance, over the 2 years of the pandemic, brought in about $18 million of a combination of federal, state, and philanthropic funding, including some from us. And then just 2 more examples. On the investment front, we just recently completed an 8-year partnership with Parker Ranch and Paniolo Cattle Company, in which we are producing grass-fed local beef, strictly for the local market. And that's been available at every Safeway store in Hawaii for many years now. Now it's getting into the military commissaries as well. And the last one, just for a single policy example, probably something that most or many of the people in this room, including of course our ag committees in both the House and the Senate, supported. Last year was Act 175, which requires the Hawaii Department of Education to make sure that 30% of the food served in the school is locally sourced by 2030. And from the farm to school pilots that we did a number of years ago, we got several schools from 3% local to 24% local in 1 semester. So we know 30% by 2030 is absolutely doable, and doing so will add $15 million per year of demand for local farmers and ranchers.
We are an extension program out of the university's College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources. And for those of you who are not familiar with our cooperative extension service, it's a community outreach service that provides practical application of science into the community. And one of the things it supports is the local food system. They work directly with farmers to provide guidance and support. So it's the university's outreach arm to really support our farmers. Our program has existed since 2003 when we first started. Our focus was really to support farmers with business technical assistance. So if they needed help putting together a business plan, we'd help with that. A marketing plan, or like how much does it cost to grow this head of lettuce? That's the type of thing that we were doing. And we still offer that service statewide. But back in 2012, we started a beginning farmer training program because we saw that there was a need for more farmers. We needed more food security. And we saw that there was an aging farmer population. So people were calling us and saying, I want to be a farmer, but I don't know how to farm. And that's why we started our training program. So we provide, practical, land-based, experiential training for those who want to enter the agricultural workforce or basically start a farm. And it's designed to be a low-cost educational opportunity for aspiring farmers. It's a 9-month intensive program with production and business training. They can go on to have 3 years of incubation with us so they can start their business, start building markets, saving up some capital so that they can have a low-risk opportunity to try this out before they really invest and commit into something else. So when we incubate farmers, we offer infrastructure, we offer equipment. They don't have to buy all of this on their own. So it really is opening up an opportunity before they make a longer term commitment. So we have 6 training sites across 4 islands. We've graduated about 470 people at this point. Over the last 3 years, 69% of our graduates have gone on to either start a small business or enter the food system workforce.
I'm Haley Miyaoka, co-owner of Ahiki Acres, a 1-acre vegetable farm located in Waimanalo. My partner is sitting right there, Matthew McKinnon. We are both graduates of the GoFarm program. We had no experience beforehand, and from the GoFarm program, we learned everything about how to build a small farm business. We started in the fall of 2019, and since then, we've been able to scale from just half an acre of vegetable production. We produce about 15,000 pounds of produce a year, with gross revenues of $200,000 a year. So this is way higher than the average amount for farmers. Our main crops are fast yielding and nutrient-dense vegetables, including leafy greens, tomatoes, cucumbers, beets, carrots. And our 2 main revenue streams currently are the Kailua Town Farmers Market, as well as 20 local vendors, including restaurants, grocery stores, like down to earth. I agree with Senator Dela Cruz in the film that access to land and infrastructure are the 2 main barriers for us currently. For infrastructure, we're actually, I feel like we're in a good spot because there are programs through GoFarm, NRCS, FSA that offer grants that we can acquire capital to build our infrastructure. But land access has been the hardest for us. For the past 2 years, I've been trying to find land in Waimanalo to expand our property. I was born and raised in Waimanalo, and it's also one of the places with the highest rates of food security in Oahu. Currently, we're also the largest veggie producer on the east side. Opportunities have popped up in other areas, but I'm really dedicated to staying in Waimanalo. However, after knocking on doors, I've been either turned away or have been offered really short-term leases for lease rents that are high over the market price. I've also been working with the Department of Ag to pursue leases, which has turned out to be an arduous journey with no success. At the age of 26, I hope I can inspire more young people to become farmers. I never thought that this would be a sustainable lifestyle, but as I have told you, based on our farm success, we are able to support the livelihoods of both my partner and I, and we also employ 2 part-time employees. However, I can't inspire other farmers if there's no easy access to land.
I'm a really strong believer that we have to talk about the food system and scale the food system, not just ag. I know that might sound weird, but I'm a believer that yes, the land and the water issues, absolutely, in certain regions, that's a major issue. That alone, I don't believe is the solution. And scaling up ag, so the film talked about sugar and pineapple a lot. At that time, ag was a huge percentage of our GDP. But sugar and ag did not feed Hawaii. Let's be clear. When ag was at its highest peak as GDP in Hawaii, it was not feeding the state of Hawaii. In fact, that was exactly the same period when we became more dependent on imports. We lost our independence, our resiliency, our sustainability when GDP of ag was at its highest. So don't think scaling ag alone means we solve a lot of the issues that are important to us. So what do we scale? What do we shut down? What do we rethink? So I'm a real believer that we need to think about the whole food system, all the different pieces that need to connect, as was mentioned in the film multiple times, from land and water and access and rents and so forth. Absolutely, no argument with that. But if the rest of the food system is not relevant and robust, I'm telling you, you have land and water for the rest of the food system, from aggregation to distribution to wholesalers to value add to manufacturing to retail to wholesale to institutional purchasing. If that piece is not working, I'm telling you, ag is still going to be suffering, no matter how much you solve the land and water issues. The food system is where we need to be talking about. We don't have it figured out. We're very honest about that, very vulnerable about that. It's a journey from decades of plantation agriculture, bankruptcy, transitioning to something else, what that future is. I'll be honest, I don't know exactly what that future is. I think that's why we're in this room together. We have not fully transitioned from the plantations yet. I'm gonna say that again. We have not fully transitioned from the sugar and pineapple plantation yet. We are still in transition as a state. So it's up to all of us to figure out what are we transitioning to. And yes, organizations like Kamehameha Schools absolutely hold us accountable. We gotta do our part to transition our former plantation lands and go back before the plantations. Before the plantations, there was another agricultural system too that we didn't talk about too much tonight. So let's go back to that too. And how do we bring the best of all of these systems forward and decide for ourselves what is that future agricultural system we want in Hawaii and work towards that. And I think, again, whether it's on the ag, production side, to again, different parts of the food system. And that's kind of, I'll end with kind of what we're working on now. We're challenging ourselves as an institution. Again, we don't have it figured out, but that's where our food system initiative right at the schools at the moment is how do we increase productivity on the productivity side. How do we bring to bear not just our ag lands, we also happen to be the largest commercial landowner in the state. So how do we bring our wholesalers, our industrial land, our cold storage facilities, our retailers, our wholesalers, how do we more intentionally reposition commercial assets to support the food future we want for the state? And then also as the schools, DOE is the biggest restaurant in the state, but institutions like Kamehameha Schools are pretty big restaurants. We serve thousands of kids breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So how do we, from an institutional purchasing standpoint, set in aggressive goals to walk the talk on our end so that whether it's from the farm to actually the food coming into our kids' mouths, how do we connect the dots across the food system?
So I guess one of the things that I see that's different between Hawaii and other states beyond the obvious is we have to pay more attention as a state to the value chain. So Kaio kind of, I don't know if you use the word value chain, but you kind of got at the rest of the system, of the food system. If you're in a mainland state and you don't have a nearby slaughterhouse or co-packing facility or contract manufacturer of a food product, you just go a few more miles to the next state or to the next county. It's not that big of a deal. When you have separate islands and just 1.4, 1.5 million people, oftentimes there's complete holes in the value chain, like there is no slaughterhouse on a particular island, or there's one and it needs to be refurbished, or there's no co-packers, or there's complete parts of the value chain that are just not there. And that's why, Kai was saying if you have land and water, but you don't have the rest of the value chain, you can't get it to market. So as a state, we have to make sure that we preserve what's here in terms of infrastructure, refurbish the old stuff, and make sure that we support that as a state. Now, a mainland state doesn't have to do that because private people will come in. Here we've got the chicken and the egg problem. Ag is small enough right now, a private developer's not gonna come in and just build a co-packing facility. They're not gonna do it. So this product development center in Waiwa or something like that, if it's developed or seeded or funded by the state to help fill a hole in the value chain, that can be a legitimate use of government funds, whereas on the mainland, they wouldn't even think about it because a private party would do it for them. It's not gonna happen here. So that's kind of one of the points I wanna make, is filling those gaps in the value chain. And one last one, this is digging back even more years in the dairy. It drove me nuts when, for example, I'm sorry, this is somewhat random, when the Hawaii flour mill went away, that drove me nuts. It went, I won't go into any more detail, but it left because of a really stupid leasing reason, and someone in the government, I think, lost their job over it, if memory serves. But that was massive food storage that could have been very helpful during the pandemic that we didn't have because of a stupid decision in terms of the lease. And when you lose a piece of infrastructure in Hawaii, it does not come back. So you got to refurbish it, protect it, and try to develop it.
I totally agree with Kaeo about the food system. Land and water is the obstacle we see while we're supporting these new farmers, right? We can grow Haley to an acre, But then what does she want to scale to next? Maybe 2 to 15 acres. The ag parks are full, there's nowhere for her to go. But, so what can make that feasible for somebody who wants to stay at that scale? Is it being able to live on the farm? There's not a lot of opportunities to do that kinds of things. A lot of times that can make or break a farmer because then they're not paying an extra rent when that's happening. There's a lot of food hubs coming up now where they can aggregate from a lot of small farmers to fill larger orders. And I know, we're looking at commodity level, but I really want to remember the small farmers who are sometimes doing this part-time because they're making maybe, $10,000 or $20,000, but sometimes that is bringing money to their household, which is also allow them to make it here. So I don't want to forget about that small farmer as well. But when we have like the Ulu co-ops who are aggregating from a lot of people, all of these kinds of infrastructure in the food system, I feel can help as well. And so supporting that. And of course, I have to put in a plug in to support programs that help all of them because we do get supported by Ulupono, we get supported by Kamehameha Schools.
Again, every region is so different, so I try not to generalize because there's some areas we have choke land available, but it's rocky, it's rough, it's steep, maybe no more water. But again, certain things grow there, so how do we, sometimes folks want to put certain crops where they are, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it probably should go somewhere else, but that's not where the person is or the warm body, and the warm body is so critical. But I will say one thing that we do need to get better at, including Kamehameha Schools, I fully own this, is how do we get better at doing smaller and kind of phased opportunities for land parcels. And before I forget, I did want to second the ag housing issue, which, it's a super hard issue for us that we're challenged to do for a bunch of reasons. But I do think the whole ag housing issue is something that we're going to have to tackle. And we're definitely going to need our counties and our state legislature and so forth to help with that. How do we work with policies and so forth to make it not just pencil out, but just feasible with communities and the temperature in our communities right now for development and so forth. How do we give flexibility to large landowners like us to be able to do the appropriate type of agricultural housing and development for communities? So I do think that's an area to work on. I think the ag housing, and I think housing and people want to live where there's a community, right? So in some areas where we've had large plantations and we're still, like I said, in transition from plantation. A good example, I'll use Yamamoto on Hawaii Island as a good example where we happen to have a lot of land. It's still in transition. Everybody works at the hotels. Like how do we, not just us, but us with government and others, how do we create an appropriate and scale up an appropriate community for the Yamamoto coastline that has a variety of diversified agriculture with appropriate housing, with recreation, with the stores and everything that comes as you build a community. So I think that the housing piece done appropriately, and then other things that support a community. When a community comes there, they're almost going to demand and create a demand for other kinds of supporting infrastructure. So how do we build a new kind of agricultural community? I mean, a plantation built they did build an agricultural community, plantation housing and so forth, but I personally don't want to go back to sugar and pineapple plantations and that model. But what does a new agricultural community of ag housing and recreation and infrastructure, what does that look like? And how do we think through that?
Film shows about how tech is huge and these vertical farms, hydroponics. One of the reasons why I'm farming is to reconnect with the land. I have a degree in chemical engineering. I love science. I love technology, but I disagree with the teacher from the Lihu. I think that people do like to get their hands dirty, and that's why I like farming. So I think it is equally important to, put money into aquaculture, aquaponics, hydroponics, but We also need to support the small farms, people who want to be growing in the soil, because that's how we can take care of the Aina. And how are we going to take care of the Aina if we're just putting it into infrastructure?
The thing that bothers me the most worries me the most, is this is a, maybe not once in a lifetime, but it's a once in a couple of decades opportunity. Both the IIJA and the IRA has some stuff for food, more on energy, but some stuff for food as well. And Hawaii has historically been actually really bad in terms of getting its fair share of federal money, and we got to do a better job. One of the things we're working on is we're actually trying to work on grant and loan writer programs for the government. In other words, if you guys don't have anyone on staff that can get this money, we'll look at funding that for you if you'll really go after that federal money and try to bring it in, because oftentimes this money isn't even applied for. And so that's like the huge thing that just, I mean, COVID was awful, but like I said, we had leverage ratios in terms of how much money you put in versus how much money you go from 10 or 15 to 47. And on the snap double ups, the money that we put in locally versus what we got back was 60 times leverage. So the federal money, and it's a little bit tangential to what you're saying, but yes, we want to help. Yes, the government should be competing for these funds, and yes, we would consider, cooperating with the grant loan writer to get that money in, because it has to happen.
I think one of the challenges, which I totally recognize, is that landowners, they would much rather provide one lease of 500 acres to one person than 500 1-acre leases, because that's a lot to manage. So who in our community would be able to be that person who can manage that well? I don't know if that's the Department of Ag or some private company, but that's part of the challenge, and I recognize that that's not a desirable position to be in, but somehow somebody has to be willing to take on that role, and I think that would help.
Feed and fertilizer, absolutely. So we talk about land and water, obviously, things that need to happen, but feed and fertilizer, as that we're importing all of this feed and fertilizer in the state, and if we can crack the code to create a more robust industry locally producing that, it's going to have an immediate ripple effect on aquaculture, on chickens, on pork, on beef, all these different things that need that, and then all the different crops, fertilizer. So our farmers, the state is sending off millions and millions of dollars offshore to bring feed and fertilizer. So yeah, if CTAR can help, and again, the government's going to need, somebody got to help kickstart it, because people are trying, and it's really hard to get these things off the ground, these industries. But those would be two huge boons for the state if we could crack the code with feed and fertilizer.
I think part of it, it's only part of the answer, not the whole answer, is the higher tech stuff. Because if you've been in one of those hydroponic greenhouses, a vertical farm, it's freaking cool. And it's not the only way. I love planting the soil and all that kind of stuff too. And we've supported the various island school garden networks over the years as well for the kids. But you go into these things, and you'll have these, for example, these tomato plants that are going up to the ceiling. It's like 20 feet up to the ceiling. Like, how the heck do they do that? And they have it on a string. When it's time to harvest, they lower it down. The person never even has to bend over. They just sit there and pick, and the string lowers it. And Kunia Country Farms with a floating raft, and you don't have all the soil to rip off the bottom, and you don't have to deal with a lot of the stuff that you have to when you're just baking out in the sun 24/7 trying to harvest. So I love and respect the in-the-dirt farming and everything, but I think the high-tech is really important for Hawaii, because what do you need for agriculture in Hawaii? Land, water, labor, and energy. What's expensive in Hawaii? Land, water, labor, and energy. And so you have to be as efficient as you can, and when you use 10% or less of the water, about 10% or less of the land, then you've just got the labor to deal with, and I'd rather work in an air-conditioned facility than I would baking out in the sun for most people. So I think that's one part of the answer. With respect to Haley, it's not all of the answer, but I think for a lot of people the tech answer is the way to get people interested.